I'm Rob Burris, and I'm the Dean of the Cameron School of Business, and I get the pleasure, somebody yelled for that. That was like, somebody went, I think it was just like one person, but it's pretty cool. I get the pleasure of moderating some Q&A with our speakers this morning. Let's give them both a round of applause. It was great. So we have a couple things we want to get out of the way first. If you would like to ask a question, you have something on your table, a little card, and there is a text number there. And if you'll send a text to that phone number, I know Ramondo threw us off for a loop when he said that there was whiskey at his booth, and so I know some of us kind of checked out at that point. But if you've got a question that you'd like to ask one of our speakers, please send it in, and we'll get to it as we can. I'd also like, there's one other thing that we need to clean up. I've never in a public forum been asked for a raise from one of my employees.
I thought you were going to say you've never given it and you're doing it today.
No, actually what I was going to say was that my initial reaction to that kind of question is always no. But I was sitting over there and I was thinking that wouldn't it be awesome if we had a donor that we could use to present you with a raise? And this is how it would work. UNCW's regional economist, sponsored by Ernie IT. How about that? There you go. That would be really special. So anyhow, without further ado, let's get to some questions from our economists here. And if I can I ask the first one, Rob? Can I do that? Okay, I can go for the first one. All right. So I was paying attention to these presentations, and I'm hearing a lot of talk about consumer spending remaining relatively strong, especially in our area, and also that while some consumer spending has been weakened, it's not yet weak. And, so if I hear some of that talk, that yes, it's weakening, we think that we might have, seen some reductions because of rising rates. It leads me to think of a term called soft landing, meaning that perhaps these rate increases have helped the economy kind of settle down. Inflation is under control. Consumer spending has responded. So my question, talk to me a little bit about where we might end up. I mean, are you, some of what you've said today really kind of leads me to believe perhaps we might be looking at a soft landing. So anyhow, and if you can't specifically dig into that and make big-time predictions in Wilmington, North Carolina, we'll certainly be willing to hear your thoughts on it.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask him
about
the soft landing. No.
I am going. All right,
Okay.
we will ask Dr. Guettabi. How about that?
I think that there is a lot of evidence that the slowdown in consumer spending is happening below the surface. Now, the question again is, I'm going to mention 2007, not because I think that that's what's going on, but in 2007, 2008, the consumer just completely stopped spending all at once. I don't think that we're going to experience that because debt levels are fairly low still. I think that the balance sheets, while they're deteriorating, are still reasonably healthy. So I think that economic activity is going to slow down. Now, I don't know what people think of when they think of a soft landing, but I think that we're going to see an uptick in unemployment. I think that the underlying metrics that we pay attention to are going to soften. Now, does that mean that we're going to avoid a bad recession? I really think that there is a lot of evidence that there is nothing, to me at least, right now, that says that there is a bad economic decline on the horizon. But I would stop short of calling it a soft landing because I don't really know what that means.
I'd say it's just important to come back and remember that the economy's gone through incredible volatility over the last 2 or 3 years. It was very stable all through the 2010s. Then you had COVID, revenge spending, shutdown, supply chain, inflation, all of this stuff. And so bringing it back to normal, which I think is the objective, without any mess, any fuss, that's just a very challenging thing to do. It's a very narrow path to get there. The data that's come in so far has been very encouraging, but there's always the risk that things have been adjusted too far and the economy will slow down. There's also the risk that things haven't been adjusted enough and inflation will rear its ugly head again. And then as you're suggesting, there's always this outside event risk, right? If you remember 9/11, if you remember Lehman Brothers, if you remember the pandemic, something comes in from the outside, and then you could be headed toward the perfect landing, and if the wind comes up, you've got to, figure it out and move to the next thing. So I think it's not, it's a wonderful aspiration, but I think all of us ought to understand we're just on a narrow path to get there. I want to agree with something else you said. We may have a slowdown. If we do have a slowdown, it's worth remembering that we've been predicting this slowdown for 18 months. And some people say this is the most predicted recession ever. And I just say, if you keep predicting a recession, two things happen. Well, first of all, if you keep predicting it, eventually you'll be right. But the businesses I talked to a year and a half ago said, holy cow, 2023 is going to be weak. I'm going to cut back, right? So people made different decisions on hiring or on spending or on investing. Banks started to double down and looking at some of their credit decisions and not working on marginal loans. And then we get to 2023 and the economy, as I said earlier, has been relatively healthy. But then people are still predicting a recession for 2024. And so the businesses I talk to who are doing their plans for 2024 right now, as you are saying, well, I'm going to be a little tighter on discretionary spending and on hiring and on investing. All of that is to say not that things can't slow down, but if things do slow down, you don't have the cliff quite as high as you might have when everyone's going full speed. Think of 2000, when everyone's going full speed into the dot-com, or 2007, when things were going full speed in the real estate sector. Things aren't going, people aren't investing, hiring, spending at full speed. They're investing at modulated speed. And that means if we do have a downturn, I just think the overhang is going to be less.
Tom, we're talking a little bit about a recession. Talk a little bit about long rates. They seem to be up. Would you care to comment on that in terms of macroeconomy?
Well, so for those who haven't been paying attention, the 10-year, the 30-year bond rates have increased quite significantly over the last month and a half. There are a lot of reasons thrown around as to why. Two I might mention are there is a lot of fiscal issuance going out there, which is creating a supply of long bonds, and obviously that might increase the yield if you've got same demand and limited supply. The other reason is the data has come in a lot stronger in the last couple of months, as I suggested. So that might suggest more strength in the economy, and therefore it can take higher rates. Those who worry too much about it, I would also caution you that if you look at the 235-year history of U.S. Treasury bill rates, I saw a chart last week that says we are now finally hitting the average of the last 235 years. And so, a 4.8% rate is high compared to what it's been for the last 10, but not high on any kind of extended thing. That obviously has implications, for us for policy. As you think about what we try to do in policy, when we raise rates, you're trying to tighten financial conditions. Financial conditions would be rates, equity market valuations, the dollar, the strength of the dollar. And as we tighten financial conditions, that flows through to the economy. That's how monetary policy works. To the extent that rates rise and tighten financial conditions, that's obviously something I'd want to look at in my policy discussions.
Dr. Guettabi, you have any comments on that?
I think you have the president of the Richmond Fed, so I'm going to defer to it.
Perfect. We have a question from table 10. Where's table 10? It's Eric from table 10. And would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, my question's for Tom. Would you see a world where the Fed target rate could be higher than 2%?
So I get this question a bit. I didn't get it at all when the inflation rate was 2%, just to be clear. Back in the 90s, there was a big debate about what stable prices means. And some people think stable prices at the time was actually zero inflation. And after the long debate, which lasted 10 or 15 years, we sort of landed on 2%. Every central bank in the world has a target rate somewhere in the range of 2%. And it wasn't that long ago, I might remind you, 3 years ago, we'd had 20 years at 2%. So I think 2% is a very reasonable target. We've hit it in 20 of the last 23 years. And most importantly, the biggest weapon the Fed has is credibility. If you believe that when inflation spikes, we're going to do something about it, then you as price setters are going to say, well, I'm not sure there's quite that much latitude to raise prices. It's an incredibly powerful lever. And I just don't see the logic for throwing out a target before you've hit it. I think in addition to, you just throw your credibility away. And so there can be a long debate about what the target ought to be in the long term. I've been public saying I'd prefer a range to a point, 1.5 to 2.5 rather than 2, because I'm just not a false precision kind of guy. But the notion of throwing out the target before you hit the target, I just think is a choice to throw away your credibility, and I'm not sure that's a good idea.
Okay, we have a question from table 29. Gerard Newkirk. And where's 29? Raise your hand. There you are.
Yes, good afternoon. My question is, how has monetary policy and deficit spending decisions over the last 3 years impacted the lack of affordable housing for consumers in local markets?
You want me to take that one?
You can, I can
As long as
follow
they
up.
start
Yeah,
with
sure,
budget
sure.
housing.
Yeah.
Well, so let me just talk about housing in general, which is COVID happened, a lot of us were sent home, and we started spending 24 hours a day in your house. And the number one thing you notice when you spend 24 hours a day in your house is your house really matters, and sometimes that you need a better house. And so demand in the housing market just skyrocketed during COVID, and that was home renovations, that was building new houses, that was buying second houses. Demand just skyrocketed. At the same time, coming out of the Great Recession, we'd had a shortage of housing construction for 10, 15 years. People near the end of their life in their housing, think my mother, didn't really want to go to a nursing home during COVID. And so people stopped leaving their houses. And so demand skyrocketed, supply dropped, prices skyrocketed. Then construction costs went up. And part of that was house construction, but also people were building data centers and warehouses and roads and whatever else. And so you've had this perfect storm in the housing market that has higher prices, higher costs, lower availability because people aren't selling. Of course, that hits affordable housing the worst because the construction people who could build houses were building more expensive stuff, not less expensive stuff. People weren't leaving those places, and so you've had all of these things hit together. Now, the one good thing about affordable housing, and I'm going to distinguish that from workforce housing, is that there is a subsidy stack that is used to build more affordable housing. And governments have the power and the wherewithal to move that subsidy stack. Rents move along with market rents. Costs can get subsidized by whatever combination of federal, state, and local government. So there is a policy path to get more affordable housing built. We have a bigger challenge, honestly, with workforce housing because the entry-level house has moved from whatever, $250,000 to $350,000, depends by market. And those are not available at all. And I think for that segment, it's really about land and getting land, whether that be through zoning or density or through just pure land availability so that developers can build the houses. Last thing I'll say is you got a shortage of developers. Financing isn't easy these days. And so people are competing for developers. And the ability to get buildable sites for developers to work on, to get a regime where permitting can be relatively predictable and somewhat low cost is critical to get developers to build houses or affordable houses and to get the market working. We have a supply issue because demand's not going to move south, and we're going to have to work the supply issue.
Yeah, I think that it was the perfect whammy of conditions that pushed prices up. I'll start with this. Most economists agree that in order to make housing more affordable generally, you need to increase supply. It doesn't matter what kind of supply, as long as supply increases, that puts downward pressure on pricing. Locally, specifically, we've had this in-migration largely from communities, from states, from counties, where housing prices were even higher than they are here. And so there was an influx of individuals that were not just pushing up prices because of higher demand, but also that they could afford to pay more for some of those homes. And so we have low interest rates. We had people being cooped up, and that allowed them to save money. We had the pause in student loan payments. We had a lot of conditions that allowed people that had been on the sidelines to jump in and potentially compete for homes. And then locally, you add the in-migration component, and you see this very significant upward pressure. The other thing is, locally again, when you look at the number of permits in the area, permits increased quite substantially up until the Great Recession, and then they've been dropping ever since. And it wasn't until the last couple of years that we saw again this increase in supply. So the imbalance between supply and demand has been behind the scenes for a while, and I think that the influx of people moving in plus people saving money has exposed the fact that there just hasn't been enough housing built. And clearly we have a space issue here in that we're obviously surrounded by water. A lot of the growth is happening outside of New Hanover County, and we're seeing it, right? But it's going to take time for it to catch up because there is no silver bullet, right? And so especially when you've been behind the 8 ball for a number of years, and so now we're seeing it. I mean, the eye test says that there are tons of apartments being built, there are some homes being built, and that's starting to put a little bit of downward pressure on rents, right? And so, and you know, obviously it's going to take time, but I think that it's going to translate into better affordability if supply continues to go up, and the best way to increase supply is to relax zoning, but I'm not going to go on to the zoning talk.
All right, we have a question from table 30 from Natalie English that I assume is not a bait and switch about the bridge, right?
Do we need a bridge in New Hanover County and Brunswick County, people, right? So Tom and Mouhcine, thank you so much. Tom, especially to you for coming to Wilmington and for the time that you have, and I know you will spend before you leave checking out our local economy. It's really important to us that those of you in these positions know what's happening in our awesome economy. But my question, when I moved here in 2017, I moved from Charlotte. I was told it was less expensive to live here. Wrong. I was told that there was a sun tax on wages and that I wasn't going to make as much as I made in Charlotte because I'd be closer to the beach and it would be worth it to live closer to the beach and make less money. So Mouhcine talked about wage growth and pretty tremendous wage growth in our region. And so I'm wondering, is the sun tax gone?
The short answer is no. That's why I was asking for a raise. But thank you very much. I had to. Thank you, Natalie. And so, just in case you forgot. No.
Don't talk to me. Talk to them. They're the donors.
No. But I mean, in all seriousness, it hasn't gone because the wage increases that I'm describing were fairly concentrated in sectors that had experienced severe shortages. And so Tom hinted at this notion of Bojangles increasing wages more than a manufacturer. A lot of the wage growth we're seeing is concentrated in leisure and hospitality, in sectors that were flexible and were responding to these shortages. He noted state and local government are rigid, right? And so they don't respond to conditions. So that hasn't happened there. And then because of remote work, a lot of the other sectors that could recruit from other places were not adjusting wages as much. And so I don't think that the sun tax has gone. I think that we happen to be an economy that has a fairly high concentration of sectors that were affected by COVID, and therefore where there were these shortages, and employers, because they're smart, had to raise wages because the reservation wage increased because they had to fill shifts. And so that's what's happened, but I don't think that there's been any sort of structural change that's happened. I will just add one thing about the affordability. One of the questions that's in the back of my mind is, we have these people that have moved in, for example, from the Northeast, because they viewed Wilmington as more affordable. But I think that one of the things that's happened, at least in the housing market, is the affordability gap is starting to shrink, right? Because our housing prices have increased at a faster rate. And so that raises question again about the attractiveness of the area to the marginal migrant who's moving in from New York if our prices are increasing at a faster rate. I don't think we've closed it fully, but I think it's starting to dissipate a little bit.
We've got Amy Grant has a question from table 29.
Thank you. Table 29 is the Brain Trust. This is a question about arts and culture. Could you comment on the impact of local arts and culture such as literary, culinary, visual, theater, not just Taylor Swift, and how it has an impact on the growth of our economy. Thank you.
I mean, so I'll just plug this. We're potentially in the process of doing an economic impact analysis of the arts, but generally speaking, Wilmington is a destination city, right? And so, and we're a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? And so, and you come here to enjoy the beach, to enjoy the sun, but also to enjoy events. We have not had Taylor Swift yet. I'm not even a fan. Should I have said that?
No, just shake it off.
Okay. Well done, sir. Well done. I think this ends the meeting. But no, but I think that there is no doubt. So the Bureau of Economic Analysis has been doing these really interesting reports trying to measure the economic impact of arts and culture at different counties. And amenity-driven migration has increased quite substantially, meaning people pick locations not just because of the sun and the fun, but they pick it because of the activities that they can do, because of arts, because of culture. And so I think that being a destination that has these attributes has certainly massive implications for attracting and retaining talent, right? And so we've talked a little while ago about this difficulty in attracting younger people. Younger people want events, they want activities, they want arts, they want culture. And so I think that thinking carefully about the environment, livability in general, is incredibly important, and I think measuring the extent to which the existence or lack of culture potentially contributes to this leakage of talent, I think is the first step in potentially trying to make this as part of our economic development strategy.
And if you believe, as I believe, that something about this work from home is going to persist, even if it's 4 days, 3 days, 5 days, whatever people end up doing, then it opens up the floodgates in terms of where people can live and work. And the towns that are going to win are towns like this, right, that have a great lifestyle, affordable housing, and amenities are critically important to building an economy and building attractiveness to people. And what most folks don't realize is they're still thinking too narrowly. They're still thinking, maybe someone will move from Raleigh to here, as opposed to thinking it's a national market. I was really intrigued to see that California was number 3 in terms of where people are moving. This is a national migration that's going to happen. And people are picking where they're going to live, and the full suite of experiences. Technology is part of it, amenities are part of it, shopping is part of it, attractions are part of it. That's going to be critical, and I think that's a place that communities are increasingly going to be investing.
Okay. Our next question is from table 9 from Steve Horan. And we'll let the microphone go to Steve. But while we're waiting, I will point out that he's the director of our Master of Science in Finance program. If you have any loved ones or any employees that would like to participate in a Cameron School of Business master's degree in finance, please talk to Steve after this meeting.
And could he also get a raise if people were willing to sponsor it?
Thank you, Tom.
He hasn't asked yet.
Okay.
But perhaps that's what he's about to do.
I'm willing to give something up for Mouhcine. So my question's for you, Tom, I guess, but I'd kind of be interested to hear Dr. Guettabi's perspective as well. Does the Fed feel like it's trying to compensate with monetary policy for the fiscal policy that's coming out of Washington?
So there are always headwinds and there are always tailwinds to what we're trying to do. I talked about labor force earlier. Immigration could have been a tailwind. It exists or it doesn't exist. Globalization is another one. And fiscal is clearly another one. I mean, just all else equal, if you're running bigger deficits, that's more inflationary pressure. If you're investing more or less in building capacity, that can reduce inflationary pressure. So whatever happens, you just have to take it as it is. And you run monetary policy against the world as you're given.
Okay, we have a question from John Hennett at table 24.
Tom, if you're staying in town tonight, we do have some great art going on. We've got Jelly Roll at the amphitheater, and we've got Alice Cooper at the Wilson Center. So encourage you to.
People actually do both of those? That's
you
an
probably
interesting
could. We can get you a golf cart.
Yeah.
You said that there's an estimate that nearly 30% of the workforce is going to be impacted by AI. What sectors are most vulnerable?
Well, so this is really interesting. So not my report. It's a firm called McKinsey, parentheses, I used to work there, but I had nothing to do with the report. And it says 30% of the tasks. Those numbers are always big, and we'll see what happens. You and I, when we think about AI, probably think about ChatGPT, and we think about people who write documents, or I'll call it white-collar workers that are doing more commodity-like jobs. But it's interesting, as I've talked to folks who are implementing AI, they're telling me the first place they're going is actually the offshore workforce, which surprised me when I first heard it. But what they're saying is the stuff we sent offshore was the simplest, most outsourceable, offshoreable work. AI, think technology can replace humans. You do it first in the stuff that's easiest. And so it's not the highest compensation group. I mean, a lot of them, in Malaysia or Philippines or wherever, aren't making that much money. But it is a place where they say, I believe this stuff is easy to, quote unquote, automate, and I'll do it there first. And I think it'll work up the scale in the same way that, automation or offshoring has worked its way up the scale.
And it's going to move up the economic ladder eventually, right? And that's the concern, right? And so most of the advancement in automation were, I would like to say, largely ignored because they were going after blue-collar occupations that were not very highly paid. Now, obviously, we're talking a lot more about it because there is potentially a concern for the eradication of, computer scientists or for programmers. Or for years and years, whenever a student would come up to me and say, what should I do? I'd go, take as many quantitative classes as you can and take a lot of coding classes. And now that's potentially in question. I don't know the answer, but I think that's kind of what's resulting in some people losing sleep is this kind of changing what kind of skills are most in demand. We've talked for years about people needing hard skills, and now are hard skills in less demand. I'm not sure that that's true, but that's one of the questions. Is it about the interpretation of code as opposed to the writing of code? But that's a question that there are a lot of people that are much smarter than me that can answer, I think.
Greg Cruz, table 47. Where is table 47?
Yeah, so of all the people that you're migrating to the area, what percentage of those workers are working versus retiring? And if they are working local jobs or bringing their remote jobs here and working remotely?
That's such a good question. It's one of the many, but it's probably the one that I've thought the most about. I don't have a great answer. I'm going to take a stab at it. One of the things that I've struggled to calculate is what share of the migrants that have moved here are actually attached to an employer out of the area. We have no data whatsoever that could tell me how many people are attached to JP Morgan in New York but living in New Hanover County. And that has really big implications. So for example, if I look at Brunswick County, it's fairly clear that most of the people moving there are older because the median age has just increased quite substantially. With New Hanover County, it's much more complicated because we're not having those kind of signals. Now, I'm going to give you an anecdote. You sit at a brewery, you ask somebody, and they say, wow, rent is so cheap here in town. I used to pay $4,200 in New York. I'm only paying $2,800 here, and I'm working remotely somewhere. So I know that they're here. I have no sense of how to capture that data. I've asked a bunch of people about how to potentially figure out how many of these people are here. And the reason that's massively important is because talking about macro conditions, talking about the national economy, that obviously has benefited us because it's increased purchasing power, but it also makes us much more susceptible to this return to the office, to the slowdown of the national economy. Because if the JP Morgans of the world start asking people back to the office, that affects the housing market. If these people have bought homes, it also affects consumption in town. And so I've scoured all the data sets that are available, and I can't figure out a way of carving out that particular segment. And so if at the end somebody has ideas, I would love to hear them because I know it's non-negligible, but I don't know what the number is.
Okay, there's an anonymous question that has come in, and here's the anonymous question. We'll let Tom, this is your question, really. Okay. U.S. debt is at an all-time high, at what level does our national debt become unsustainable? What's the end result if unchecked?
So just some numbers. At the end of World War II, debt as a percent of GDP was 106%. 2007, those who came before us grew and paid it down to where our debt was 38% of GDP. Today, it's somewhere in the low 100s. And so that's a big number, and the trajectory has it increasing significantly over time. There's no one particular number that says that amount is too much. There were some economists, 10 years ago who hypothesized it was sort of 80%. It's not 80%. We're at 100 and something. Italy's in the high 100s. I don't aspire to be Italy. Japan's in the 200s. I don't aspire to be Japan. But the point at which it's too much is when the creditors say, I really don't like that credit that much anymore, right? I don't like what this does from an inflation standpoint, so it might increase inflationary pressure. I don't like what it means in terms of credit risk or willingness to pay. And the way that would play out is long-term interest rates would spike pretty quickly. And there are a lot of countries over time that have had this experience where they're just moseying along, running whatever deficits and running the economy however they do, and then all of a sudden, the creditors decide they don't like it that much and the long rates increase. And that, if you don't like the rate increases we've done, that's a much bigger and more threatening sort of situation. But there's no way to know when that is. I certainly hope and expect we'll work to get our fiscal house in a good place so that we don't have to go through that situation.
Thank you. Dory from table 37. Should be a mic coming your way. There it is.
What factors do economists believe are contributing to the rising demand for nonprofit support and meeting essential needs, even during periods when the economy appears to be performing well?
I can start. One of the things that Tom said a little while ago that's really important is that place has become much more important, meaning that people care about the places where they live, they care about their communities, and when you care about places where you live, and you care about your community, you want to support it in whichever way that you can. And I think that neighborhoods, I think people working from home, spending more time at home, being more attached to communities has changed the landscape quite a bit, right? And now you have people that are moving in from new places, wanting to be attached to some of these new places, and so I think it's changing these dynamics quite a bit. And a lot of people believe that during times of stress, when government spending or government programs start to shrink, nonprofits obviously step in and provide a lot of those services. And so I think there is increased recognition of the connection between the role of nonprofits and economic cycles. So clearly they're not insensitive to economic cycles because people sometimes shrink their donations when they start feeling the pinch, and it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years. But I really think that attachment to place has changed how people view their community around them, and as the home purchases increased over the last couple of years, people tend to be better neighbors. They tend to be more involved in their communities when they buy homes. I think that that's translated into the nonprofit sector.
I added a couple things. The aggregate numbers are great to watch, but the aggregates don't tell the whole story. And so if you look at the aggregates and you see that wages are up, for example, for the bottom third, that's true if you have a job. But if you don't have a job, then obviously your wages didn't go up and inflation took its bite. And so there's a segment out there, and a sizable segment, that has found the experience of the last several years to be a very difficult one. So they are, I'll call it your candidate segment. What I hear when I talk to retailers who sell into lower income communities is that people are and have been for the last year aggressively prioritizing their spend. And people prioritize their spend in many different ways, as you were suggesting before. If maybe you had a eviction moratorium, so you weren't paying the rent, you took that money and you put it in other places. If you got supplemental food benefits, what I hear talking to food banks is that the usage is way up compared to what it was. And so before COVID, I think only 70% of the people who had access to those benefits actually used it, and the percentage went up. So I think in this prioritization thing, there's probably been more usage of the things that are available. And again, I think I'd start with the fact is there is a segment out there, fixed income or no income, for which inflation has really been a challenge.
Okay, table 40, Eric Knight. It's table 40. There we are.
All right, so housing prices are cited as a large factor in the inflation equation, and the steep increases are largely due to supply and demand, especially in our region. The interest rate increases have further restricted supply, but prices, at least in our MSA, continue to rise because of all the migration. With interest rates pretty much the only tool the Fed has to fight inflation, are they not really just in effect creating a negative feedback loop where our housing prices will just keep going up and up?
Well, if the question is there no interest rate at which point house prices would go down, I think that's not right. I mean, there's some interest rate. I'd put it a little different. If you just remember 18 months ago what the housing market looked like, it was massively frothy. I mean, people were putting houses on the market. You had 14 bids for every house. Houses were going $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 above list. That was a very frothy market. So I do believe that rate increases have an impact on the housing market. I believe the froth has been largely taken out of the market. The realtors I talk to, tell me it's a fine market, but it's, there's not 14 people bidding, there's 2 people bidding. Houses are still selling, but the froth is out of it. I do think there's a question whether inflation more broadly is going to settle at current course and speed where we want to or not. But I think a lot of froth has been taken out of the housing market. And now it's just a question of whether supply will catch up to the demand, or demand will further offset. Mortgage rates may still go up a bit more as long-term rates go up. And I think we're in the fine-tuning phase of that rather than the initial phase of it.
Okay. And a question from table 49 from Cade.
Hey, how's it going? As a UNCW and Cameron alumni, fairly recent, I'm curious what y'all think the impact of UNCW and Cape Fear Community College and Brunswick Community College's growing student population has in the local job market, and more specifically for recent graduates, especially in the post-COVID era. Thanks.
I think that, look, college towns grow faster. They tend to attract more businesses. They tend to be more attractive as a destination for people that graduate from other places. So I not just because I work there, but I can't overstate the importance of having universities, of having a place that trains talent. Because again, when employees, so we can talk about taxes, we can talk about the environment, we can talk about all sorts of things. When you talk to firms and you say, what's the most important thing that you look at when considering where to locate, they say quality of talent, right? And so ensuring that the university, that the community college are continually talking to employers, figuring out what are the skills that are most in demand, training these people. And when people go to a place like UNCW, they're considerably more likely to stay. So I think that UNCW graduates are an important piece in making sure that there is a healthy labor pool in the area that can be beneficial to attracting and retaining firms. And I think that quality of life, we were talking about the arts earlier. Smart, educated people want to move to areas where there are other smart and educated people. The type of amenities that college graduates demand are very different, and as the area continues to grow and as hopefully more UNCW graduates decide to stay, we have this ecosystem that is entrepreneurial, that is also acquiring skills that are massively beneficial for the marginal employer that's considering where to potentially locate. Now, just to kind of talk about the other side, capital is footloose, meaning firms can spend their money wherever they want. In a world that is increasingly remote, UNCW graduates are also massively mobile, so the city, the community needs to make sure that it's in constant communication with these students to figure out what is it they want, how can we keep them, how can we retain them, and I genuinely think that that's at the top of the list when it comes to thinking about economic development. Nothing against aging. I'm balding, but I think that the future is young. I'm bald. I said balding, but I was trying to give myself some credit. But I think that it really is important to try and focus on trying to understand what are the attributes that these graduates value and how can we potentially create an environment that makes this place attractive for them.
As we wrap up, Tom, would you like to add to that?
No, I agree completely. I'll tell you, when I was here in 2019, I was really impressed with the partnership that I perceived between the business community and the school systems and the colleges, in terms of internships and the like. And I do think this, we're in a world where the scarce commodity is workers. That's what I described earlier. I think communities that can produce workers and connect those workers to jobs locally are communities that can be very attractive to employers. So I think there's just a fundamental benefit to the schools you talked about and the connection that you've built with this community. I think it's enormous.
Following up on that, Steve Horan, Table 9, Master of Science in Finance, rolling admissions, all online. You won't lose your employees if they do the program. So let's thank our speakers. That was great. Thank you. And now we'll turn the floor over. Y'all are stressing me out because I haven't purchased a Christmas gift for my wife yet, and I thought this was like November or something.
Thank you again to our speakers and to the Swain Center for this partnership. Hope everybody had a great lunch. I was at the Patriot Illumination table, as you may be able to tell. So please go visit them and all our other sponsors and exhibitors. The expo hall is now open just down the hall. Seminars start at 2 o'clock and the after hours opens at 4:30. Thank you again for being with us.